Apologies for running late to all of my colleagues and obviously to each one of you as well. The American people deserve to know that their federal tax dollars are being wisely spent. However, the GAO and others have consistently reported that federal spending data is often incomplete, out of date, or inaccurate. Just last week, the GAO told this committee that there are over 200 areas in the federal government with wasteful duplication, overlap, and fragmentation. OMB recently reported that federal improper payments of nearly $137 billion, that's billion with a B, for fiscal year 2015, the largest annual total since 2004, when agencies first began reporting this data. Without accurate information, the GAO, Congress, and the American people are limited in their ability to prevent waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. The Data Act can help change all of that. If implemented properly, the Data Act will allow us to finally know how much our government is spending and that money is being spent wisely. In fact, before testimony to this committee in 2014, the GAO Comptroller General said that the Data Act is the single biggest thing Congress could do to address wasteful spending. Quite a statement. Today, we are weeks away from the 2-year anniversary of the Data Act passage. Treasury, OMB are leading the implementation efforts, and they're responsible for telling agencies what data to report and how to report it. Now, while OMB and the Treasury have made progress on the implementation, many questions are left to be answered. I've heard real concerns directly from the stakeholders that the implementation of the Data Act is lagging behind. OMB has released little information on the contractor portion of the pilot program that is required by statute. Several guidance documents that the agencies need in order to implement the Act have not been finalized by Treasury and OMB. And without a clear and timely guidance, agencies may struggle to meet the statutory reporting timeframes. We're here today to determine what parts of that implementation are on track, where OMB, Treasury, and federal agencies are falling behind. And while statutory deadlines are important, I want to make sure that agencies are implementing this bill thoroughly and correctly, not just on time. As recent as just an hour or so ago, I heard stories from a stakeholder that would suggest that the intent of Congress is perhaps not being best served by the direction in which we are going. So I look forward to working with the agencies to ensure that we realize the benefits of transparency in federal spending that the Data Act can certainly provide. I thank each of our witnesses for attending here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and I now recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, Mr. Conley, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank my colleagues, you, of course, the other chairman, Mr. Hurd, and my good friend, Ms. Kelly, the other ranking member. The four of us, I think, have a common view about the role of IT in the federal government and how we can use it as a transformative tool, but how we need to use it as a transformative tool. And I want to thank all of you for the partnership. I think it's made a real difference in building some cohesion within the federal government in at least this area. And it does kind of give the lie to the fact that we can't really get anything done around here, and we never act in a bipartisan, indeed nonpartisan way, and that, you know, at least in this case, is not true. Today we revisit the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, which this committee supported on a bipartisan basis and was signed into law 2 years ago. The Data Act, if properly implemented, as the Chairman just indicated, will bring enhanced transparency to federal spending that will, in turn, I hope, lead to better decision-making. Agencies will now be required to report spending at a more granular level, and that data is to be communicated using a common language that will enable true comparisons across the federal government. Agencies, Congress, watchdogs inside and outside of the government will now be able to connect the dots on how agencies are spending, which will help identify duplication and waste, something the committee examined last week with the annual GAO duplication report. The Data Act holds great potential for creating efficiencies and government savings. While the OMB and the Treasury Department continue to make progress in defining those new standards, a recent GAO report notes that some definitions will require additional work as they could lead to inconsistent reporting. I look forward to hearing how those concerns are being addressed, and also want to hear more about the status of the pilot program to reduce the reporting burden on the recipients of federal grants and contracts. The Data Act directed OMB to create such a pilot program to streamline such reporting. For the grantee program, OMB partnered with the Department of Health and Human Services and is working with GSA on the contracting portion. The law also calls for input from a diverse group of federal award recipients. However, GSA and OMB have yet to present a detailed plan to achieve this goal. As a member representing a number of federal grant recipients and contractors, and that's understatement, I want to hear how OMB plans to better engage those communities in this effort. I'm hopeful that as the pilot moves forward, specific grantees and contractors will have that opportunity to test proposals that agencies might use to reduce duplicative or unnecessarily burdensome reporting. While the design of the grants pilot program appears to be on track, I am concerned by the GAO's assessment that OMB is taking a more narrow approach with respect to the contracted portion, focused on certified payroll reporting. For example, the GAO said, and I quote, "The plan did not include specific information on the methodology, strategy, or types of data to be collected. Further, scalability was not addressed to result in the recommendations that could be applied government-wide. The design also did not indicate how data will be evaluated to draw conclusions," unquote. At this point, the procurement portion of the pilot is at risk of not meeting the 12-month reporting cycle deadline set by Congress. These new Data Act reporting requirements for agencies are not scheduled to be implemented until May 2017. So today's hearing, I think, Mr. Chairman, is the perfect opportunity to look at what's working so far and to examine those areas that might need more work a year out from that deadline. As my colleagues know, I was pleased to co-author the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, FITARA, also known as Connolly-ISA, which has a better ring to it, we think. GAO, in its 2015 report on duplicative and wasteful spending, said, and I quote, "It should improve the transparency and management of IT acquisitions and operations across the government." I think the Data Act and FITARA will both complement each other and help agencies make smarter investments. The Data Act holds tremendous potential. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses any suggestions they might have for ensuring that we realize that potential and stay on course. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hurden, Ms. Kelly, by the way, something we may also want to have a hearing on in terms of what can go awry with the best of intentions in the IT field is FedRAMP. And it may be time for us to have a hearing on that, because this reminds me of that, though this, I hope, is in better shape than FedRAMP. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments and his kind words. The Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Information Technology, who's forgotten more about technology than I have ever known, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for including our subcommittee on this important issue. Good afternoon to our witnesses today. Yesterday was tax day in the United States. Millions of Americans filled out their tax forms and sent a portion of their hard-earned income to the federal government. In fiscal year 2015, the federal government spent $3.7 trillion, which amounted to about 21% of the nation's gross domestic product. That's about $12,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. What are taxpayers getting for that investment in their government? Is the government spending their money wisely? Are there some programs that work well and should be expanded and others that are duplicative and should be eliminated? The unfortunate reality is that the federal government spending data is housed in disconnected and siloed systems that use various unrelated formats, making those questions very difficult to answer. And the cost of our inability to accurately track federal tax dollars are steep. Chairman Meadows mentioned the over 200 areas in the federal government where the GAO duplication report identifies areas of duplication, overlap, and fragmentation. Eliminating these areas of waste and duplication would save us approximately $125 billion from 2010 to 2025. The monetary cost is devastating, as is the cost of citizens losing trust and confidence in their own government. Government secrecy and corruption results in loss of trust from citizens, but so does general incompetence. That is why the Data Act is so important. If implemented properly, the Data Act will allow us to begin to untangle the web of federal agency spending and start to restore trust between government and its citizens. I thank the witnesses for the testimony today. I'm looking forward to working with them to effectively implement the Data Act. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee on information technology, Ms. Kelly, the gentlewoman from Illinois, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing on today's panel to discuss the administration's progress in implementing the Data Act. The Act requires that agencies report spending data in a consistent way, which in turn will create opportunities to improve operational efficiency and oversight. The transparency that the Data Act is designed to provide will help enhance accountability for agencies' spending decisions. Once implemented, the Data Act will provide the public with federal spending data that is accessible, reliable, and usable. Mr. Liebrick has stated that this committee, and I quote, "Better data leads to better decisions and ultimately a better government." The Office of Management and Budget and the Department of Treasury have initiated multiple efforts to carry out the requirements of the Data Act. I commend the way the administration has embraced the Act and worked diligently to set the executive branch on the right path. The Department of Health and Human Services has taken a significant role in designing a plan to test a pilot program to streamline and reduce the reporting burden on grantees. I look forward to hearing more about their plans for the pilot, some of the potential outcomes, and a time frame for results. However, the procurement portion of the pilot program, which intends to test areas for reducing the reporting burden on contractors, has taken a narrow approach, focusing on only one area in which contractor reporter could be reduced. In a report released today on the pilot program, GAO raised concerns with the design of the procurement portion and its ability to provide meaningful and useful data for effective testing of the pilot. GAO recommends that OMB clearly document how the procurement portion of the pilot will contribute to the Data Act and requirements and ensure the design reflects leading practices. It is important that congressional oversight helps ensure that the opportunity to reduce reporting burden and streamline areas of reporting is not missed during the implementation of the Data Act. The work of Congress does not end with the passage or oversight of the Data Act. It is equally important that Congress provides sufficient resources for federal agencies to make the necessary changes to implement the Data Act and transform the collection and reporting of federal spending data. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her opening remarks, and I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses, and I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Michelle Sager, Director of Strategic Issues at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Ms. Sager, it's our understanding that you are accompanied by your colleague from GAO, Ms. Paula Rascona, who has expertise that we may need during questioning. Next, we have the Honorable David Mader, Controller at the Office of Federal Management, the Office of Management and Budget. Mr. David Liebrick, Fiscal Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Treasury. And Mr. Michael Peckham, Executive Director of the Data Act Program Management Office at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Welcome to you all. And pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. And we will also swear in Ms. Rascona. So if you please arise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. And in order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate if you would please limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. However, your entire written testimony will be made part of the record. And so I will go ahead and recognize you, Ms. Sager, for 5 minutes for your opening testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Meadows, Chairman Hurd, Ranking Members Connolly and Kelly. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss GAO's ongoing work on DATA Act implementation. As we heard in your opening statements, DATA Act holds great potential, and I'd like to take just a moment to talk about that potential. If fully and effectively implemented, the DATA Act holds the possibility of transforming what we know about federal spending. That includes grants, contracts, and loans. This holds great potential for you in your work as policymakers, considering appropriations and authorizations, for federal agency officials trying to connect the dots about various programs, for your constituents, and for all of us as taxpayers trying to understand where the federal dollars go. However, transforming this promise into a reality does require a very heavy front-end investment, as well as leadership from OMB and Treasury in collaboration with their colleagues across the federal government. In my statement today, I'd like to talk about some of the complex technical and policy issues that have already been addressed, and we acknowledge that these issues are ongoing. At the same time, there are a number of challenges that must be addressed in order to assure full and effective implementation. I'd like to briefly highlight 3 specific areas. First, the data standards and the associated technical guidance. Second, what federal agencies are reporting as some of the challenges in their DATA Act implementation plan submitted to OMB. And then third, the current status of the design of the Section 5 pilot to reduce recipient reporting burden. First, with regard to the data standards, OMB and Treasury have made considerable progress in establishing data element definitions for reporting on federal spending data. However, more complete and timely guidance is needed in order to ensure consistent and comparable reporting of high-quality data. A lack of finalized guidance to date has slowed agencies' ability to operationalize the data standards and the technical schema. It is our understanding that additional guidance is forthcoming very soon, and we look forward to analyzing this guidance to follow up on the recommendations and findings from our January 2016 report. Second, with regard to what federal agencies are reporting as challenges in the implementation plans they began submitting to OMB in September of last year, continuing through January of this year, these challenges fall into a couple of main categories, and they include competing priorities, resources, systems integration, and guidance. Agencies do also acknowledge that they have identified some potential mitigating strategies to mitigate these challenges, and these include effective communication, information sharing, and the opportunity to leverage existing resources. Agencies also reported that additional support from both OMB and Treasury is needed to ensure full and effective implementation. Third, with regard to the pilot to reduce recipient reporting burden, as you noted in your opening statements, OMB has taken action to implement the pilot in 2 parts, one focused on grants and one focused on procurement. The Department of Health and Human Services has been designated as the executing agency for the grant portion of the pilot, while OMB leads the procurement portion along with the General Services Administration. We did find that if implemented according to HHS's proposed design, the grants portion of the pilot will likely meet requirements established under the Act and does follow leading practices for effective pilot design. However, as you also noted, and as we state in the report that we're issuing today, the procurement portion of the plan does not document how it will contribute to meeting the Act's requirements, as well as following leading practices for effective design of a pilot program. We are concerned that the design of the procurement portion of the pilot could hinder effective implementation. GAO will continue to monitor OMB and Treasury's progress to address DATA Act recommendations, including those calling for a data governance structure, for developing a federal program inventory, and for expanding two-way dialogue with stakeholders as implementation proceeds. In conclusion, almost 2 years into the DATA Act's implementation, we are faced with a mixed picture. Given its government-wide scope and complexity, effective implementation of the Act requires sustained progress and attention to known policy and technical issues. Although progress has been made in several areas, the challenges that we and federal agencies have identified could lead to inconsistent reporting and must be addressed in order to ensure full and effective implementation. This concludes my prepared statement. I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sager. Mr. Mader, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, Chairman Hurd, and Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittees. I appreciate the opportunity to be back here. If you recall, Mr. Liebrick and I were here in July of 2015 to talk about the progress we had made on sort of almost the first anniversary of the Data Act. What we'd like to do this afternoon is talk a little bit about the progress that we've made since we were last here. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the accomplishments over the last 9 months. First, we established the data definition standards for 57 data elements required under the Data Act, and I do acknowledge the comment from GAO that this is an ongoing effort. We are really going to be looking on a forward-going basis at all the data elements because we agree with the concern about how agencies understand the definition and then actually apply it so that the descriptors that are in USA spending accurately represent the spending. Second, we've provided additional guidance to the agencies on the initial guidance that was issued in May of 2015. In December of this past year, 2015, I had issued an OMB controller alert that actually emphasized and provided some additional direction to that previous guidance. Third, as part of the President's FY17 budget proposal, we did actually receive implementation plans, which GAO has reviewed and commented on. It's also to note that in the President's 16 budget, we asked for a total of $92 million to implement the Data Act. And if you recall, when the legislation was passed, CBO actually scored it at about $300 million for the full implementation. Unfortunately, in the 16 President's budget of the $92 million that we asked for, only 31 of it was appropriated, 25 of that going to the Treasury Department, and rightfully so because of the expansive role that they play in implementing this act. So that basically left about $6 million for 3 other agencies. In my written testimony in Exhibit B, you'll see a table of both 16 as well as 17. Fourth, OMB has continued to support Treasury in their iterative approach in developing the data schema, which I think we all recognize is key to successful implementation. I want to note, and I know my colleague is going to talk more extensively on this, that the approach that Treasury took and that OMB endorsed was basically an agile or iterative approach. So over the course of the last year, agencies actually saw at least 4 versions of the data schema, and this allowed them to begin to actually develop implementation plans. If we had taken sort of the traditional waterfall approach, what we would have been waiting for is actually the final guidance. So the fact is that we've actually, over the past year, been sharing with agencies the progress that we've made on the design. Lastly, I want to comment on the continued outreach that we have had both with federal agencies as with stakeholders as well, external stakeholders. We have had extensive conversation both with stakeholders in and outside of the government, and our commitment is as we move into this last year of implementation, we'll continue to have that exchange and dialogue. I'd like to talk now about the critical nature of the next year. First, it's important, and my colleague from GAO has testified to that OMB and Treasury move forward on the release of their documents. Respective for OMB is the final implementation guidelines, and for Treasury, it's the data schema. I'm pleased to say that by the end of April or very early May, both of those documents will be issued in final. But again, I want to emphasize that both for the schema as well as for the guidance, agencies have been working with us all along. Second, tracking the agency progress to implement. Dave Liebrick and I last week kicked off an initiative to do readiness reviews of each of the agencies, each of the 24 agencies that are covered by the Data Act. We are personally leading these efforts, and last week we completed 2, Department of Interior, Department of Energy, and actually tomorrow we're doing transportation. We're going to continue to work with the agencies in updating their plans and milestones. Once all of the guidance is finalized in the last week or 2, agencies will begin working on implementing the revised plans. I think we are making progress, and I am interested in continuing to work with the Congress in securing the resources that we need to fully implement the Act. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony. Mr. Liebrick, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Connolly, Chairman Hurd and Ranking Member Kelly, thank you. I would just echo what Dave has said. Is both he and I have been very personally committed to making sure that the Data Act is implemented in the spirit that Congress intended it to. This really is an important piece of legislation. I think it's not an understatement to say it has the ability to really transform the way government functions. We have a responsibility to taxpayers to be good stewards of their money. And the Data Act, I really do believe, will truly make better data, better decisions, better government, and that will save taxpayers money. As we get better insights into what we're trying to do as a government and the programs that we have, the Data Act, I think, is a really foundational piece to that better future for government. Treasury was established over 225 years ago, and we were established to sort of make sure we were accounting for government money, and Alexander Hamilton issued the first monthly Treasury statement to Congress in 1789, and we've been doing that every month since. We also issued something called the Daily Treasury Statement and the Financial Report of the United States Government, and while those are good and interesting documents, the Data Act actually allows people to see data more specifically as it relates to decisions on a day-to-day basis. And so this evolution is a very important one, and I think one that will really, again, very much improve the way government functions. I will focus a little bit on Treasury's responsibilities with respect to 3 elements of the Act. One is the schema, and I'll talk about that in a second about what that means, the broker, and then ultimately the newly designed USA Spending website. Critical in discussion of those 3 elements picks up on some points that Dave made. When we approached the design of these efforts, we did it with an agile, user-centric approach. Traditionally, in my experience in 25 years of government, when government takes on a technology project, quite often what we do is we sit down and we think about what the functional requirements are, and then we go off into a corner and we build that system, and then we kind of release it in a very linear fashion. This idea here was that we wanted to make sure that we were doing quick releases and agile releases so that we knew if we were going to fail fast, that we knew that if something wasn't working, we could get input and feedback from users and from a variety of communities to make sure we could make those adjustments. And this has proven critical with respect to the schema. The schema kind of in plain language is Dave mentioned the 57 data elements that we identified. Well, we're actually collecting more than 57 because to get that full picture of federal spending, you need more than 57. And as a result of that, you need to ask agencies, where are you going to get that information? And the approach that we took was a mapping and an extraction process. Rather than building a new big system of sort of a big database, we sort of identified this as philosophically said, we need to find out where the good data exists in the federal government, tag that data, extract it, and then be able to present it. The schema is about taking those 57 data elements as well as the other elements to round out that life cycle picture of federal spending and then to organize it. And we've identified that 7 files need to be submitted to the broker. The broker accepts those files and then kind of validates them and ultimately then prepares them to present to the public on the USA Spending website as it goes forward. We issued the first schema in March of last year, version 0.2, and we've issued 4 iterations of it since then. So while in December of this, we were hoping at December we would have a finalized version, we issued version 0.7 in December. And that version really pretty much kind of rounded out the picture. In late March, we issued version 0.1, and we closed the comment period in the beginning of April. As Dave mentioned, we're expecting to finalize the final version at the end in the next several weeks. Agencies have had the opportunity to see that schema. They know exactly what's in it. We've also done something called a prototype broker, which is allowing the agencies to come into our sandbox to take that data and test it against the broker to make sure that they can validate whether the data is good or not. As a result, agencies are further along than they would be in a linear sort of waterfall kind of approach by using the Agile process. This gives us better confidence in the discussions that Dave and I have had with agencies, that agencies have done the kinds of things that they need to do to get ready. And there's certainly challenges going forward. I don't want to underestimate those challenges. But Dave and I are both very much committed to ensuring that we're keeping on top of where the agencies are and making sure that we understand what impediments there are and facilitating the implementation the best we can. Treasury has established something called a Program Management Office, which is designed to actually follow through on a regular basis with the agencies to help them. We did an 8-step playbook telling the agencies you need to do these certain things in order to get ready. Agencies have been following that playbook. And so I think that gives me confidence that we're very much on the right path.
I thank you so much for your testimony, Mr. Peckham. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Meadows and Hurd, Ranking Members Connolly and Kelly, and distinguished members of the committee. I am the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services Data Act Program Management Office within the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Financial Resources, or ASFR. I am pleased to be here along with my colleagues to discuss HHS's activities as the executing agent of the Data Act Section 5 grants pilot. Under the HHS mission to enhance and protect the health and well-being of all Americans, various goals of the department are carried out through HHS-funded grants, where services are provided at the local level by state and county agencies or through private sector grantees. In support of our mission, HHS awards more federal grant dollars than any other agency. The Data Act PMO is strategically located within ASFR. This was a natural place for our PMO to reside, given the focus of the Data Act on financial data and ASFR's unique role in understanding the entire award lifecycle, from budget formulation to program policy oversight, and finally, audit resolution. We are working closely with all HHS operating divisions and staff divisions to carry out and implement the reporting goals set forth within this statute. In May of 2014, OMB asked HHS to be the executing agent for the grants portion of the Section 5 pilot. We are happy to partner with OMB, taking on this role, giving our past experience as a leader in the federal grants community, and our recognition that there is a valid need to reduce duplication and burden in recipient reporting. HHS sees this as an opportunity for increased recipient engagement to understand where we can find efficiencies in the reporting process throughout the grants life cycle. Section 5 of the Data Act calls for the creation of a pilot to develop recommendations for standardized reporting elements across the federal government, the elimination of unnecessary duplication in financial reporting, and the reduction of compliance costs for recipients of federal awards. Based on this structure, HHS worked in close coordination with OMB to create the Section 5 Grants Pilot Framework, containing 6 test models. A test model is a grant tool, form, or process that we will analyze for improvement, where the outcome will be documented within the final report. When developing the test models for the pilot, HHS considered 3 other factors in addition to the legislation: user feedback received during our recipient outreach efforts, leveraging existing system development efforts and technology, and minimizing the impact to pilot test participants. The first 2 tests will be performed using the Common Data Elements Repository Library. Through this tool, we will test the functionality of standard grants terminology that has been developed as a result of the Data Act and the Uniform Grants Guidance. The second test is focused on better management and reduction of forms currently used during the grantee reporting process. The third test is consolidated federal financial reporting. Here we will test the benefits of having grantees submit all information required for the federal financial report into one system, and potentially to allow the further sharing of that data electronically. The next test is based on single audit. Single audit is an organization-wide financial statement and federal awards audit. We are testing a consolidated workflow of forms to minimize grantee entry of required information. Notice of award proof of concept is our 5th test model. The notice of award is a form, letter, or other instrument that provides a breadth of information the grant recipient needs to perform routine accounting and financial reporting. We will test the benefits to grantees of a standardized notice of award. And finally, we have Learn Grants. The Learn Grants model is intended to be a single source of guidance regarding the grants lifecycle. Our test will provide insight into advantages for grantees of having this information available through one consolidated web link. In March of 2016, HHS began testing its first model, single audit, and is in the process of commencing the remaining test models. We will have final results for all models by the May 2017 deadline for inclusion in our report to OMB. On behalf of HHS, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today and share with you the work we've done on the Section 5 grants pilot. We look forward to our continued partnership with the committee and welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Information Technology, Mr. Hurd, for a series of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I always like to start these things off with the positive thing. When we had this hearing last time, the first question I asked is, what is the deadline for the agencies to justify identifying those 57 pieces of information? And we got it done. So kudos. All right, that's an important step. Now, the question is making sure that all the agencies are mapping their data to those 57 standards. And my understanding, my question was going to be, when is the finalized technical schema going to be made available? Y'all said it probably in May, so that agencies can solidify their data plans, submission plans. But what I heard, Mr. Liebrick, was that some agencies are already doing that, correct? How many?
So when we put the 8-step implementation plan together, all the agencies are through the first 4. We've had 17 or 18 of the CFO Act agencies come to the sandbox already to test their data.
Say that again, how many?
17 or 18 of the 24
Gotcha.
have actually come to the sandbox already and actually taken files and put them into the prototype broker. Those who have not, many of them have come back and said they feel pretty comfortable about where they are. Now, we want them to come in sooner, but that has not been a major concern to us yet, that those other 7
So
not been there.
the folks that have come in into the sandbox tested this on your test broker. What were their problems? Did it work? Were you satisfied?
I think the first time you go through something like this, and I know you're very much familiar with this, is that when you bring data in for the first time, you realize that there are relationships and there are quality of data issues that you need to address. So those who come in early are quicker at getting at kind of quality issues and also some of the relationship issues that they need to understand across files. So that's a significant challenge for the agencies, because you're asking for 7 different file formats. And in those file formats, there sometimes can be information that doesn't line up the right way. And so you have to go back and then start really working on the data, which is why, again, we've been very pleased that people have been coming in early rather than later.
So agencies are mapping their information to the 57 pieces of the standards. You have a broker site that is functional, but the final guidance that is to be issued in May, what is the difference between version 7 and what is going to be issued in May?
Some of what when you do kind of the Agile process, you're taking comments back from the agencies and you're getting some of the feedback from the broker, for example, about what needs better clarity and how the broker can be improved and how the schema can be improved. So in that process, we've been taking some of those comments back, and in the version that we released in the end of March, we received a good number of comments back. But when we've gone through that list, there are none of them in our view which are showstoppers. They're more about better explanation and some tweaking of kind of the schema to make it work better.
Right. So agencies are supposed to begin reporting data in a little over a year, May 2017. Are we going to hit that?
The short answer is yes. The little bit more complicated answer, I believe, is that we will see between now and then about how quickly they come along in terms of how the quality of their data and how quickly, in some cases, some of the issues that GAO has identified of linkages. One of the critical linchpins of the Act is the award ID, and that is the ability to link data across different kinds of government activity.
So the SBA has been a pilot. So this is a pilot in addition to the sandbox that you've been running with the other 17 or 18 agencies. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how did Treasury use their feedback from that pilot program to improve the broker?
Well, I think that, when you had the SBA, it very much encouraged us that we were on the right path. And so when we looked at what SBA was able to do and what their CFO came back and said is, they talked about sometimes agencies right now are going to USA Spending Today to get information about their own agency because the information's siloed. They can't get to it by themselves. The SBA pilot, I think, proved the concept that if when you bring this data together and you do presentation, you can get much more granular information, much better information about across the enterprise.
And was that SBA pilot just for limited to grants, or have we done a test for contracts as well?
It was initially limited, and we expanded it further into the portfolio. So they do have more than just grants and that we piloted.
So when is the centralized broker service going to be finalized?
So we are expecting to have, I mentioned it was a prototype broker. We're expecting to have a beta broker this summer, and we're expecting to have the production broker in the fall, early fall.
So we should be able to start seeing more bulk data on USA Spending in the fall.
I would say that we are more likely to see it in May of 2017 because I think what you're trying to do between now and then is make sure that you're comfortable with the quality of data. You're making sure that things are functioning the way that they should.
Gotcha. I yield back the time I do not have.
I think the chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sager, what's your understanding of what the objective was when Congress passed the Data Act? What were we trying to achieve?
Well, the Data Act has several purposes, as you know, and it's to increase transparency over spending, improve data quality, and to provide information on the full federal spending life cycle for grants, contracts, and loans.
In a way that we didn't have before.
Exactly.
And you would concur, Mr. Mader, with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So given that, one of the things GAO found was deadlines may nonetheless be missed 2 years after passage. How concerned are you, Mr. Mader, with deadlines being missed?
So I think that the readiness reviews that we started last week and then the finalization of the guidance and the schema will allow agencies to lock down their implementation plan. I would suspect come the end of July, August, I could probably say with a certain amount of certainty, this number of agencies are surely going to make it. And these are, these may be not going to hit that exact date. But I couldn't tell you today that all 24 of those major agencies are going to make it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think all four of us would love to have that report by August. So even though we're not in session in August, some of us will be around. And I think all four of us would welcome your getting that to us so we can just monitor how's it going. Yeah. Speaking of implementation plans, what's your guess? Because that was a milestone, self-set, right? So what is our expectation of how many agencies are going to meet that goal of having an implementation plan by a date certain this summer?
So everybody has an implementation plan. Those implementation plans were submitted late in the summer. Those are the plans that GAO reviewed and commented on in their report. But going back to last summer, we didn't have the final data schema for them to actually look at and say, okay, now I understand we have the data elements, as Chairman Hurd said. We now have the data schema, we have the enhanced guidance, and now what they need to do is look at their environment, their specific environment, and understand what interfaces they need to make within systems and what data they need to clean up.
But I'm sorry. If I'm a citizen watching what you just said, I haven't got a clue what you just said. Everyone submitted an implementation plan. That was a draft.
It was a draft last summer. Correct.
So when do we finalize those plans so that we now get to implementation?
So those plans I would guess that those plans will be finalized in the late June, early July timeframe, because one of the systems that all the agencies need to update is the financial management system, because that's the authoritative source. We have 3 predominant software providers. they're in the process now of designing the patches that they need to make. So once we have the design of the patch, the agencies can finish their plan, because there are going to be interfaces between some of these systems, and then, we go into full implementation.
Okay, so next step is finalizing implementation plans that were drafted last year.
Yes.
Because of all the things I can't repeat you said. And then we get on to actual implementation.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we monitor how well we're implementing after
Right.
that. Okay. And we hope to be able to say we're doing that by and large starting around August, September.
Correct.
Okay, good. One of the other concerns GAO had was we may end up, with the best of efforts notwithstanding, with non-uniform reporting standards. Is that of concern to you, and what are we doing to make sure that's not the outcome?
So the additional guidance that we put out in December and the additional guidance, which everybody already has, it's just going through the OMB clearance process. The additional guidance that goes out formally in another week or two will reemphasize the importance of adhering to not only the 57, but the additional data standards. Because I think in GAO's testimony, they point out, and rightfully so, even though we've defined a data element in a certain way, agencies are not necessarily all the time interpreting it correctly. So it's going to be, a continuous process of just monitoring what agencies are doing.
Well, doesn't it also involve some guidance from your office?
Which is the guidance that I mentioned has already been out there in draft and will be final.
So if you're noticing somebody might say potato and someone say potato, that's one kind of reporting variance. But if somebody's talking about potatoes and someone else is talking about, asparagus, we got a problem. And because we're not speaking the same language, we're looking at different things. So presumably, part of your role is to catch that early, OMB's role, so that we're avoiding that as much as we can.
That's correct. And I want to emphasize what Dave said. 18 of those agencies brought real data in. It wasn't test data. It was real data that they brought into the broker. And they actually, some of these agencies walked away and say, wow, we have a lot of work to do over the next couple of months to clean up our data. So not only did it help us validate as a proof of concept, it actually helped them then to start identifying things that they need to do with their data systems.
My time is up, and Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and my colleagues for doing this. I just want to say to the panel, this is not the sexiest of topics, apparently. Witness the press table. Lonely man, there he is. God bless him. And he will find redemption. Oh, and one over there, sorry. All right, two. But this is the kind of initiative that actually can be transformative for government, can save lots of money, can make us more efficient, make us more effective, free up resources for the mission, and make people feel better about actually their core mission and what they're doing. So thank you, and we want to work as a team to try to make sure it happens and happens well, and the four of us will stay on it. So we look forward to your report to us, Mr. Mader, in August, and Mr. Chairman, we may want to consider another hearing in September. I thank my colleague.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes himself for a series of questions. So, Ms. Sager, as you look at this particular program, what would you say is the most critical missing element that is out there? I know you've got a wide breadth within your report on what you've acknowledged, but what's the most critical aspect that we're missing?
There are actually a couple of things that we've highlighted in our report, and I'll just emphasize them briefly. First is the data standards themselves. As we have heard, the data standards do exist, but agencies may still interpret them differently. We used a couple of examples in our January report, award description and primary place of performance, which can mean very different things, and our prior work on USA spending showed that it does, in fact, mean different things to different agencies. So the standards and the forthcoming guidance, we can't emphasize enough. That it needs to be paired with the technical guidance, with the technical schema, so that agencies know what they have to report, how they have to report, and when they have to report. So those are a couple of the critical areas. And then for the pilot, As we noted in our report, the grants pilot appears to more or less be on track. We do have concerns about the procurement pilot, and that begins with kind of all the basics about the leading practices for effective design of a pilot. What's your hypothesis? What are you measuring? How are you measuring it? How are you going to know if you've achieved success? I think if you put all of that together, it's kind of a couple of critical links that are key to effective implementation.
All right, so Mr. Mader, let me follow up on that, because we're having this hearing today because I left the last hearing from you and Mr. Liebrick on the progress we were making. Ended up giving a speech to people who really knew about the implementation of the Data Act. And so I went away feeling real good based on your last testimony, only to find out that the devil in the detail perhaps is not as glowing as it was portrayed to be. And I'm going to say this in the kindest way that I can. You and I go way back. I remember I think your first hearing was on GSA properties, and I told you were given a pass. I like you. You're an engaging kind of guy. But I need you to respond to this. There is the comment out there that OMB is going through the motions with some of these agencies, allowing them to take data and just move it from one reporting system to another without really changing the quality of the data. The 57 components are treated by OMB as 57 suggestions, not 57 requirements. How do you respond to that? Because that was the question I had to respond to, and I didn't have the answer. So I'm hopeful that you have the answer so I can go back and share it with the stakeholders.
So let me start with the 57 data elements. Those are sort of in our policy guidance now, so.
Is it a requirement or not? Yes
Oh,
or
it's
no?
a definite requirement.
All right, so you believe that the statute requires those 57?
Right, and we spent.
Because there's some people out there that says that you think that it's only 11. So your sworn testimony is the 57 are required, is
Oh,
that-
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Go ahead.
And that's what, I think if you go back to my testimony from last July, that's what
I
we
just want to
said.
clarify.
Right.
I'm just saying there's something between your testimony and the implementation thereof that we're missing. And I'm not sure what level that's at, but some people are getting conflicting reports. So go ahead.
So, well, the other point I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, is, as Chairman Hurd mentioned, when we were here last summer, we said we would be done by the end of August, and we were done. So.
Done with which part?
With the 57 data
Right,
elements.
with
Got them
identifying.
defined, and people are starting to use them in their system. I think that should give you confidence that when we make a commitment, we're going to fulfill that commitment.
All right, so how do you respond to the second part, that we're not just change? So let me ask you this. Are you taking information from legacy systems and bringing it over and saying, okay, this is corrupt data, it meets this sort of guideline, and allowing yourself to put it in a different format? How do you reconcile the two?
So you think about several different, and Dave mentioned 7 different files, but what I want to focus on is basically 3 data sources. The one is the financial data system, right? These are the systems that actually are audited every year. We have a high degree of confidence in the quality of the data that's in the financial system. So the financial system is the system of record that's going to be used heretofore for current it's being used now for USA spending. It will be used for enhanced, as you said, when we start displaying the full government spend. So I have 99.9% confidence in that financial data. The other system of record that we're going to be using is the procurement and contract system. And my colleagues, both in GSA as well as the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, have been working for the last couple of years and have had an extensive program of cleaning up the data in that system. So you're going to bring these 2 data.
So how do you do that without guidance? Because here's the interesting thing is you've continued to offer guidance, and I've looked at some of the budgets for the different agencies on how they're going to, and it's all over the place. I mean, in terms of some agencies asking for a whole lot of money to implement some, and I can't find any rhyme or reason in terms of where the numbers would come from a business standpoint.
Right.
I mean, big agencies asking for big dollars, big agencies asking for very little dollars, small agencies asking for a huge number. I mean, there is no rhyme or reason. So how do they do that without real complete guidance from you and Treasury on what's going to be required?
So I'd go back to, we have had complete guidance out there. It might not have been the final version, but it was close to the final version for months now, so people have been commenting. But
So there hasn't been a wink and a nod that just says, get this information so we can comply to the Data Act without really changing anything by anybody on your staff, to your knowledge?
it's not coming from me, it's not coming from OMB.
Are you aware of?
I am
any
not
of that?
aware of any.
So
No.
Is that the first time you've ever heard that accusation made about OMB?
That surprises me, sir.
Okay. So it's the first time you've heard it?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So let me go back, though, why there's a variance in requests for funding both in 16, 17. And let me use the financial system as an example and touch on SBA, because we used SBA sort of as the early proof of concept. SBA, over the last couple of years, actually had built a totally integrated system. So their financial system is totally linked with their contract system as well as with their loan system. Now, compare and contrast that to a place like DHS that has 20-some-odd financial systems. So the cost, what's driving a lot of the cost of implementation is the state of their legacy systems. We have systems that are totally, integrated and upgraded, like small business, like National Science Foundation, like the Department of Energy, but then we have legacy systems stretched across some of the bigger departments. That's why you see that variance in requests for funding.
Really, because I'm going to go back and look at that. I don't know that that's totally accurate, but that's the new realm of thinking. I'm out of time, and I want to be sensitive to the ranking member, Ms. Kelly, so I'll go ahead and recognize her. We'll have a second round after Mr. Grothman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Liebrick, I understand that Treasury has released multiple versions of the Data Act schema for testing for a final release. Can you explain the significance of the schema and when it is expected to be completed and released?
So when you look across the federal government, you have enormous different kinds of systems, and you have information that resides in lots of different places. So one of the things that we did in the Program Management Office was to help give a blueprint to the agencies about how they can map those 57 data standards and sort of show where and identify where the authoritative source of that information is, and then extracting that information and that's what the scheme is about. It's about taking those 57, in addition to some other data elements, and describing to the agencies how they have to arrange that information, how they have to orient it to make these 3 files or 7 files, depending on how you want to look at it, that they can then report into the broker. So the schema really is about which elements you're going to report, how you're going to organize those elements, and then what format you're going to submit them to Treasury.
Thank you. Mr. Mader, your testimony explains that Congress appropriated 1/3 of the amount requested in the President's fiscal year 2016 budget request for Data Act implementation. Can you explain the impacts on implementation of these shortfalls?
I think if you go to the GAO report and testimony, I think they do a good job of raising, through the review of the implementation plan, the concerns that agencies have in resource constraints that they're been subject to in 16, and we don't know obviously where 17, the President's budget is going to go. What it's basically caused agencies to do is to reprioritize other initiatives. For example, I also work on moving agencies to administrative shared services. There's a lot of work that needs to be done by an agency to prepare to move to another service provider. Those are the kinds of initiatives that we've actually had to slow down to redirect resources to implementing the Data Act. I think it's important to note you haven't heard OMB, you haven't heard the administration say at all since the beginning that we're not going to implement the Data Act. So we are moving as fast as we can and making trade-offs in order to move forward.
Well, I hope we can do our part to make sure we successfully support you, so you will be successful. The Data Act requires the Secretary of Treasury and the Director of OMB to consult with public and private stakeholders to establish the new data standards required under the Act. Ms. Sager, do you agree that stakeholder engagement is important to the full and effective implementation of the Data Act, and why?
Absolutely, and we are aware that there has been extensive stakeholder communication to date. Part of what we are talking about in some of our GAO recommendations is the importance of that stakeholder communication being two-way communication. In addition, the importance of documenting and widely distributing that communication. So, for example, although it may be very valuable for those at a particular conference to hear from OMB and Treasury officials, certainly there's a much broader community that would benefit from knowing about some of the challenges that are faced by agencies, what the plans are going forward for implementation, and then making sure that that information is shared, particularly as we head toward a change in presidential administrations.
Mr. Mader, during the last hearing, you identified ways OMB and Treasury have engaged in outreach with stakeholders, a critical piece of your efforts to reform federal spending data. What are your future plans to engage with stakeholders outside of government?
Congresswoman, I think we're committed to continue the kind of outreach that, I mean, I don't think a week goes by that Dave or I are not out speaking at some conference with stakeholders, external stakeholders about the Data Act. As GAO has testified in the past, all the work that we've been doing actually is posted on our external-facing website, so people have an opportunity to see what we're doing and to also comment on it.
Some of the stakeholders have called on Treasury and OMB to go beyond the statutory provisions to consult and to fully collaborate with federal and non-federal stakeholders. Is there a forum for federal stakeholders to collaborate with each other and share best practices?
So for the federal stakeholders, a couple of forums. We have, Dave and I chair a executive advisory committee. We also chair a interagency advisory committee where we have representatives from various departments and various communities. We have folks from the contracting profession, from the grants profession, from the financial profession. We also interact with the various councils. These are, I'll give you an example this afternoon, actually, while we're here, there's a CFO council meeting. So if we get done early enough, Dave and I will probably go back and talk about the hearing. So we use all of those kinds of standing forums to communicate with folks. I mean, I would be shocked if a federal agency said they really haven't heard from OMB and Treasury. That would mean they were probably sleeping.
You know, the Sunlight Foundation has said in order to truly engage Data Act stakeholders and the public that Treasury and OMB must conduct their policymaking process in an open and transparent manner. So I yield back the time I don't have.
I thank the gentlewoman. Before I recognize Mr. Grothman, which I intend to do, Mr. Peckham, you know, it's real easy for us to start focus, and you haven't had any questions, but I want to say that's most of the time a good thing in this committee. And so by saying that, I want to recognize the great job that you and your team have done with regards to the pilot and really taking this thing seriously on the grant side of things. It's very easy to condemn and point out the things that are not going right. And so I want to just say thank you. You may get some questions, but you know, keep your head low. So, Mr. Grothman, I'll go to you for 5 minutes.
Sure, I hope we don't cover old ground here, but I'll start off with Mr. Mader. First of all, I want to make sure that in your mind, the Data Act applies to all federal agencies and cover everybody?
Yes, sir. It covers all federal agencies who have appropriations, yes.
Okay. Could you just, to clarify things, eventually provide the committee with a list of agencies that you feel broken out that it covers?
Absolutely.
Have all these agencies submitted implementation plans to you guys already?
Some of the, I don't believe some of the smaller commissions have submitted plans. We're in the process, and it's timely that you asked for the list of finalizing who we believe under the statute is covered. And I think it's important to not only to sort of capture the total but also to put it in a context, the 24 CFO agencies, the ones that we've been interacting since day one, represent 90% of the spend that we're talking about. So we're going to have, in the Data Act, when we go live, at least 90% of the total government spend. You know, whether we get every last commission to that place in May, again, you know, let's see what goes on over the course of the summer.
Maybe it'd be a good idea, not just for us, but for your own benefit, if you provide a list of the agencies, what you feel the statuses of each of the agencies, and then you can kind of know and they can judge themselves where they are compared to the other agencies, whether they're up to speed at appropriate time.
We will.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Sager, can you just in general give us your opinion of the role that OMB and Treasury have in addressing these challenges or how they're helping the agencies?
OMB and Treasury are charged with leading the Data Act implementation effort, and so they are responsible for providing the guidance, for providing what we refer to as kind of the governance structure for how this is going to happen, for memorializing changes as they occur, and for developing the technical schema that brings all of the data together.
Okay, thank you. Just in general, Mr. Motter, Mr. Liebrecht, how have your agencies made use of the information that's been forwarded to you so far? What do you do with it? I guess Mr. Motter's always on the spot, so with Mr. Liebrecht.
Now, one of the things that Dave and I hold a monthly senior accountable officials call with the agency. So we've identified in each of the agencies a senior accountable official who's responsible for making sure the Data Act information is flowing right into the organization and getting implemented correctly. In addition, I've mentioned this PMO, the Project Management Office. We hold, or the Program Management Office, we hold office hours on a regular basis. We hold webinars where we hold, the question had come up earlier about our outreach to states. We hold a monthly call with state and local officials to give them feedback on where we are and updates on where we are. If you ever meet the people in the PMO, they're just enormously energetic and committed to what we're doing. And I think it's because if you're kind of in this area of data, this is really kind of a great place to be right now because you can see the difference you're going to be making across government. So they're very active and aggressive in going out and talking to the agencies on a regular basis to make sure that we're keeping them up to date and giving them the opportunity to ask questions. They're the ones who have been holding the sandbox sessions with the agencies, and we're hopeful when we get to the broker, the beta broker, that agencies will actually be able to do that from their agency rather than having to come to Treasury to do that information, so that there'll be more real-time feedback and better to work with their data sooner.
Okay. In general, you know, a couple agencies have mentioned, you know, lack of resources. Of course, everybody always talks about lack of resources. But you feel that's a valid complaint, or do you feel you're able to leverage additional resources and that won't be a problem?
As I mentioned to Congresswoman Kelly, I think we're committed to implementing this, and we're trying the best we can to reallocate and redirect resources.
Okay, thank you. One final question. How frequently are you going to ask the agencies to update their implementation plans? I guess another way of saying that is, how often do you check in with them and make sure they're on schedule?
So because of the sort of the place where we are with the implementation schedule, as I mentioned, we're going to receive the updated implementation plans, let's say in the June, July timeframe, which we'll provide to the committee as a summary. What we're also going to do is actually implement a monthly dashboard where we're going to require agencies to report into us against the timelines that they have in their revised implementation plan. So we'll be able to monitor between now and the first of the calendar year and then through May of 17 the status of each of these. I mean, it's not like Dave and I are absentee landlords. We're like talking to these folks all the time.
Thanks. Very informative.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for a second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mader, correct me if I'm wrong. or if you don't want to throw people under the bus, you can just blink twice. What I bet you is probably happening, the fact that Treasury is doing this agile development, right? So you have these, the versions, different versions of the schema, and you have interim guidance. I bet you there are some agencies that are using the fact that it's interim guidance to not implement or not begin implementation. And so, was that 2 blinks? Did you just blink twice? No, I'm joking. So what I would like to see is, if we do another hearing on this, let's start bringing some of these agencies that are responsible for doing this, because guess what? You have guidance on what those 57 data elements are. They can start mapping their information to those 57 data elements. The agencies can start linking their financial systems to their award systems, all right? You don't have to have the final guidance. So I would be interested in, if you could provide to this committee the agencies that have been to the sandbox and used their system, and then also let us know which agencies haven't been to the sandbox, because y'all shouldn't have all the fun in sitting here and answering these questions. We should be bringing some of these agencies and let them know that, we're going to hold them accountable for implementing this, right? Y'all are providing the guidance. Y'all are providing interim guidance to help them move along so they don't have to do everything at the last minute. And if they're not taking advantage of it, the problem is on them, right? And so this is something that I would think we do Mr. Chairman, in September. And also, I'd like to know, if you haven't already provided this to the committee, the list of all the officials that's responsible for the Data Act implementation, whether it's the CIO or the CFO, so we know who's responsible. And so if we're not seeing movement at that agency, we know who we can call and have sit down here. Mr. Maynard, it seemed like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think I want to reassure the both subcommittees, the members. There isn't an agency that has come to us and said they're not going to be able to implement. They haven't come to us yet. So I don't think anybody is deliberately slow-rolling us in the implementation. I think there are challenges, and I think that agencies, depending on their size and complexity, are starting to realize the lift that they have between now and next January to really get ready with the second quarter data, which is the quarter of data that's going to be loaded in May of 17. One of the reasons that Dave and I decided to go out and do these readiness reviews is, it's easy to just send emails back and forth to people. I think it's more effective when you sit across the table of other senior executives and you look them in the eye and you sort of go over their plan and ask them, are you going to make it? And what I've been saying to agencies for the last several months is, if you're not going to make it, then what you need to do is have your cabinet secretary write to Sean Donovan and tell him, and then we'll have a meeting.
Mr. May, apologize to cutting you off, but listen, you have Treasury has done their program management office. You're holding these conversations, but at this point, and Ms. Sager, I'd be interested to know who's mistaking what those data standards actually mean, because this is as simple as picking up the phone and calling one of y'all and saying, hey, does this mean this X or does it mean Y? And so getting to a point, I don't think any agency should it should be unambiguous at this point, now that all 57 data standards have been outlined, and y'all are open, and you have people that are willing to help these agencies with the implementation. So Ms. Sager, if it hasn't been identified, I would like to see the list of those agencies that are still a little confused on what those 57 data elements are supposed to be.
And I would just say that based on our prior work on USA spending, one of the things we discovered there is, although agencies may think they fully understand a definition, it's once they implement submitting data and they're doing it differently, and you're trying to make those cross-agency comparisons, that's where it becomes clear that what you thought was a shared understanding of a definition, upon implementation, it then becomes clear that shared understanding may have been different given the breadth of the federal government.
And this, my last question, I don't know if this is best for you, Mr. Liebrick, or you, Mr. Mader. Have agencies made adequate progress on linking their financial and award systems in order to meet the Data Act requirement?
Let me start, and I'll ask Dave if he wants to say it. I think that, as I mentioned, one of the advantages that we have is we only have 3 predominant software providers for financial management. They're in the process now of working, as I mentioned, on those patches. Putting the award data into the financial system, that's been a guiding principle, since day one. So agencies are working on that. They didn't need additional guidance to actually move out on that. And again, I think we want to see the revised implementation plans, because we've actually given them basically Treasury developed an implementation roadmap that takes us from where we are to May of 17, and with critical milestones. And what we're asking agencies to do is take that template and actually put your critical milestones over the top of that. So we'll be able to see come this summer where there is a disconnect from a timing standpoint.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, my last quick question. This is easy for a yes or a no to the gentleman at the end of the table. Mr. Liebrick, has Treasury mapped its data to the 57 elements?
Treasury is right on progress.
Excellent. Mr. Peckham, has HHS?
We are very close.
Excellent. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes Ms. Kelly for a second round.
I know we asked about resources and sometimes people just think about money, but do you feel across the board there are enough skilled people or people to get the work done?
I think that when we talk about resources, we're talking not only about dollars, but we're talking about, human resources. And, with this particular initiative, this is very technical. I think as Chairman Hurd will appreciate when he sees some of the detail. We don't have all of the federal resources. That's why we rely on our partners, contractors, to bring in those additional resources. And when budgets are constrained, it constrains how much we can bring in from the outside. So again, it's a challenge, but we haven't let anybody off the hook.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peckham, I really appreciate the work that HHS has put into piloting the implementation of the Data Act. Your leadership and the hard work of your staff has set implementation off to the right foot, as you've said. I would like to discuss your successes in implementing the grant portion of the pilot. How have you been able to do so much progress in designing, preparing for the testing, the grant portion of the pilot?
Thank you, first of all. We at HHS take this very, very seriously. We understand that there are a lot of benefits to be gained, not only for the grantees, but for the federal government. And we believe that if we can lead this by an example and establish some efficiencies within our processes and pass those on to the grant recipients, there's a win-win situation for both areas. And that's generally the approach. I'd also like to recognize the staff that I work with. They are very committed. We have folks from different areas throughout the department, from different business lines, and we're working in a collaborative fashion to make sure that we understand where we need to go and finally engaging the public as much as we can.
The GAO report concluded that the grants portion of the pilot will meet the requirements of the Data Act if implemented according to HHS's proposed plan. What expectations does HHS have for the outcome of the grant portion of the pilot?
We are hopeful that all 6 models are successful and that we can find efficiencies from them that we can recommend in the report to OMB and Congress and see what action could be taken.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sager, thank you for being with us today. According to the recent GAO report, the design of the procurement portion of the pilot will not meet the Data Act requirements. What are the potential consequences of the procurement portion of the pilot not meeting the specified Data Act requirements?
I would mention a couple of things here and also point out that as OMB has defined it, the Section 5 pilot consists of the 2 portions. So it is the grants portion and the procurement portion both together to meet the requirements in the Act itself. Given that the procurement pilot particularly, I think one of the things that is unclear is the extent to which the dollar amount will be specified and met by the procurement portion of the pilot. As you saw in the written statement, it is a fairly narrow portion of the pilot given its focus on certified payroll. That may provide informative information. At this point, there was not enough information available in the plan itself for us to fully understand how the procurement portion of the pilot contributes to meeting the specifications in the Act itself. The other thing is the diversity of pilot participants. Again, it was not entirely clear how that particular requirement in the Act would be met by the plant or by the pilot as it is currently specified. We understand this is a work in progress, but we look forward to learning more about that so that we can understand how this portion of the pilot also contributes to scalability. Given its narrow focus, it's important to know that the evaluation and the lessons learned from this portion of the pilot do have broader applicability to the procurement community.
Mr. Mader, how do you respond to the concerns raised?
We accept the criticism that GAO has documented around the procurement pilot. We're in the process of replanning that effort to ensure that the necessary methodology documentation is in place, and we'll work with GAO on that. I think it's important, though, to also recognize that long before there was a Data Act, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy actually has been working on reducing contractor burden. I know Congressman Connolly knows this market very, very well from being in Northern Virginia. I don't think a day goes by that my colleague Ann Rung doesn't hear from the Professional Services Council around things that the government can do to reduce the burden that we put on doing business with the government. Our commitment is to come back with a replan in the next 45 days so that we can assure ourselves and you that we'll meet all of the objectives of the Data Act.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. So in 45 days, you're going to come back to this committee with a revamp of what you plan to do on the procurement side of it? Is that what I heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how did we end up with such a narrow scope? I mean, you got Mr. Peckham, whose expertise is not this particular area. Yours, Mr. Mader, where it is your area. And he's working on 6, you're working on 1, but it's not even just 1, it's 1 narrowly tailored to include Davis-Bacon. How in the world did you come up with that as a criteria?
So we, as I mentioned, we've been working on burden reduction for contractors for several years, and there were several initiatives.
How's that working? If I were to ask the general population that Mr. Conley has the privilege and honor of serving, would they say that you're getting an A or on the other end of the spectrum?
I think they would comment, as my colleagues in GAO would, like in a Blue Book cover, is some progress but more work to be done. I think the community would recognize that.
I think you're generous with your analysis, but go ahead. We'll leave it at that.
I think they would recognize that we've made progress. They'd probably say you could make more progress.
So answer the question. How did we come up with such a narrow? My understanding is the whole national dialogue. You got 3 responses originally from the contractor, 3 contractor responses. None of them referenced this, but yet you picked this.
Because of the work that we had done previously with the community. And Davis-Bacon.
So what you're saying is you did a pilot based on work you had already done?
Well, what we did,
Because I don't
Mr. Chairman,
think that's what we wanted.
So we feel that the pilot, as it's currently scoped, using wage reporting for Davis-Bacon, and for folks in the audience that don't understand the size of that, so any federal funds over $2,000 that are used in construction or renovation are subject to Davis-Bacon.
I understand, but we're talking about certified
I know.
payroll. So, I mean, again, we're talking about a narrow scope within a narrow scope. And so, yes, it may be big in that the universe of those that qualify, but we've narrowed the scope. And I think you just admitted under testimony that it may not be indicative, it may not be a meaningful pilot. Would you agree with that?
No, I would not agree with that.
So you disagree with GAO that it's meaningful in all respects to what the Data Act was seeking to find out, that it will provide enough meaningful data that you will be able to implement the Data Act properly.
We believe we can,
So you do disagree with Ms. Sager?
right? Yes.
But your testimony a few minutes ago was that you agreed with her and that you were going to revise this in 45 days.
What I agreed, Mr. Chairman, was that we did not do a good job of documenting our methodology and our approach.
All right, so you're suggesting that this narrow, tailored pilot is indicative to make informed decisions across all federal agencies on procurement? That's your testimony here today.
With regard to this particular area of focus, and as GAO has testified, there's two components to this that need to be that are actually put together, so.
Ms. Sager, would you like to have seen more inclusive on the procurement side in terms of a pilot? Would it have helped you to identify the strengths and weaknesses by having a broader scope?
If the pilot had been broader, certainly that would have given us a better indication of how this would apply to the procurement community more broadly.
So do you have doubts that with the narrow scope of the procurement pilot, that we may not be able to make the best informed decisions in terms of the general procurement side of the implementation of the Data Act?
Based on what we have seen to date, we are unable to take the limited documentation that we have to understand how certified payroll narrowly has lessons to be learned for the entire contracting community.
All right. So here's what I would ask you, Mr. Mader, since you're going to revisit this in 45 days or get a plan back to this committee, is how we can potentially expand the scope. I think you've already said on the pilot program you're going to miss the deadlines. Is that correct? I think that was in your earlier testimony, maybe not.
No, it wasn't.
Okay. So are we going to have a full year's worth of data from the pilot program?
That's why we're going to go back and take a look at our plan.
So yes.
So I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, here's my request of you. We want a full year's worth of data, even if it's going to take you beyond the original target date, because less than a full year's worth of data is meaningless in terms of really making informed decisions. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So you can commit to the committee that you'll give us a full year's worth of data.
We can, yes.
Thank you. All right. So let me close with one last area. You've been talking about the implementation plans for the agencies, that they've submitted these implementation plans. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Can we get a copy of those implementation plans from the agencies? Will you supply those to this? Because I'm sure those would be very informative in terms of the understanding of agency to agency based on those implementation plans.
When we receive the revised plans, we would be more than happy to come back and
Well,
brief
you can go ahead and send us the ones you have now. Your testimony was that you had implementation plans, and so obviously we're in the Data Act, we're going down that. You're making informed decisions on guidance based on those implementation plans, on what's in them, what's not in them, I would assume. Is that correct?
No, I don't think we're making decisions based
So
on what's on the
you've looked at an
agency's plans.
implementation plan for all the agencies, and you've made no changes in your guidance?
Oh, no, I didn't say that,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. What I said is, the implementation plans were done early on last year, right? A year ago, this
Right.
past summer. And I think as Dave Lieberk has testified, this iterative process allows us to have a constant
And that's
dialogue.
fine.
So
But I guess what I'm saying is just send us the implementation plans as you have them, as they are revised and changed from agencies. Will you go ahead and send those to
We will.
us as well? All right.
we will.
So with that, I appreciate the specificity, Mr. Mader, of you answering some of the difficult questions. So let me share about the communication, because it's one thing to give a speech, it's another to have communication. Sometimes the only way that you get two-way communication when you give a speech is on the receiving end of either insults or things thrown from the audience. Let's hope that that didn't happen. But in doing that, one of my concerns is that I'm hearing from stakeholders that there is still ambiguity. and there is a lack of commitment in terms of the quality of the data and the big concern that is being expressed. And so I'd like you to address it, not in a question and answer here. But it sounds like that you're serious about reaching out, that you and Dave, as you've said, are reaching out on a regular basis. Here's my ask of you, is to get with those that have to, not just the agencies, but subcontractors, others that have to implement this, and ask them, what are the problems? And give them carte blanche to be able to say, because sometimes they may not say it to you, they're saying it to me, and because they've got to do business with you, and I don't. And so, so as we look at that, if you would redouble your effort on the two-way communication, and not allow it to go out, but then say, okay, based on this input that we've gotten from stakeholders and agencies and across the board, we are modifying it based on this input in this way, where they understand that their input is actually having a direct impact on you and Treasury. Now, from your testimony here today, that you're indicating that that is happening. And I just would ask that you redouble your efforts there, and as we look at that, go forward. If there are no closing statements, I would just like to thank all of you for your testimony. Thank you for your diligence in protecting the hardworking American taxpayers' dollars and transparency. If there's no further business, the committee stands adjourned.